It's my plan to finish up my comments on the second half of the list that I read out last week. But first, let's be stout-hearted young troopers and play like that you're progeny of Gilbert and Sullivan or Strom and Glotz. Back based upon the binary division that I have made, that from an ordinary viewpoint does cover all human possibilities, and that is that humans alone have the possibility of either acting or thinking of acting. Now, based on that, I want to point out several things that are going to, or that should test, in a way, your sincerity and your armor-plated, bulletproof brains understanding. That is that it seems, from all 3D views, it would seem that it's much easier to reform how one thinks of acting as opposed to how one acts. Now, this is not normally noted. Even my division is not normally noted. But this is the nature of what goes on in life, in religions, in psychologies, in attempted other forms of the soft sciences of sociology, just attempts to explain man and his position. Those who have not simply reformed, but those who have actually undergone some change during these few decades that they're alive, can look back and then see quite clearly how significantly and how sizable even the smallest change is. The smallest change. And we're not talking about reform. We're not talking about swapping one habit for another. We're not talking about swapping one pattern of acting, one pattern of thinking of acting for another one. Specifically in religion, what I want you to note, and we're back to one of these strange areas once you begin to see it, and I'm going to try to show you how strange it is also tonight. Religions apply themselves, apparently, if you'll notice, they focus their attention. Life makes the religions focus their attention, apparently, on actions about what to do, thinking of actions, theological theory, philosophy, insofar as the major religions, the 3 or 4 that run the world, that capture most of the population, have almost nothing to say about thinking of action. It's about action, which is, to say the very least, the harder of the two. People, ordinary people, will fairly, speaking in a relative manner, will accept new ideas much quicker than they will attempted alterations of their behavior. Someone can stand up at a seminar, someone can stand up on a street corner and say something that an average person had never heard before, and they're thinking of action. They may hear it for the first time, and it may be fairly radical, far removed, that is, from what they normally think about a certain thing, and they may hear it and go, hey, yeah. Not so with behavior. You cannot stop someone on the street or drag someone into a temple or a church and say, hey, you, I want you to start using your left hand. Hey, you, if you drink, I want you to stop drinking right now. You have a different story. So apparently life has religions, to speak of them. I'm just using that as the whole umbrella group of systems that apparently are in charge of changing man. The religions deal, they focus their attention, their activities, almost entirely on action, not thinking of action. Now, I know, of course, that there is things thrown here and there in the religions, that as a man thinks, so he does, or something like that. And if you kill somebody in your heart, you've actually killed them. The damage has been done. All those sorts of things are in all the religions. But do the religions require that you change the way you think about acting? For one thing, you can't prove it. This is not the evidence of what I'm saying, but you can't prove it. You can ask somebody, hey, have you quit imagining that you're having carnal relations with your neighbor? And the parishioner, the would-be follower, can go, yes. Who knows? But the priest or someone can say, to the neighbor's husband. Has so-and-so, the other parishioner, has he quit fooling around with your wife? And the guy can say yes or no. So life apparently has life dealing with the harder of the two. Now, would you not, if you were a 3D philosopher and there was any continuing validity to 3D logic, would not you find that interesting, if not weird? Why would it pick the harder of the two? All right. Because if and when it does succeed, not in one individual's lifetime, but as it succeeds, it has the, on its time level, the salubrious immediacy of a benefit to life's growth. Not humans thinking about changing their actions, not thinking about an alteration in their behavior, in the way in which they act, but an actual change. Why else does life have humanity be able to think about change? Those who have actually undergone some change, and once I pointed out, can look back on it. Now, stiffen up your backbone, because this applies to everybody here and getting this on tape. Those of you that think that you may have undergone the greatest changes. If you'll be real strong and stalwart little boys and girls and you look back on your behavior part, you hadn't changed all that much. You hadn't changed all that much since you started this. The thinking about changing has altered. The thinking of your actions has altered. But those of you that think that you have gotten the most out of this, those of you that think that you owe me the most, that this has been the most explosive occurrence in your life, if you can turn back a clinical, even a 3.5 DI on yourself before and yourself now, speaking of actions, change hasn't been that great. But then, as I pointed out to you earlier, you kind of people then can begin to have some quite clear view that just a teeny weeny, I think is the scientific description, just a teeny weeny change in a human is, another scientific term, I guess you people, is humongous. It is sizable, it is weighty, it is almost gargantuan. Just a teeny weeny bit. And of course, people who have changed and can see some of this then look around and understand that other people do not ordinarily change either. That I have been correct, not playing with words, but I have been correct that people swap one habit for another. That machines simply swap one form of mechanical reactions for another. And they seem to be now conveying, transforming, transferring different kinds of energy. But to actually change is a strange and elusive creature. Not quite as elusive perhaps as the dodo, but running into a close second. And that just a teeny weeny bit of change is a lot of change. A lot of change. The blackboard. The floor. The pen. The do-si-do. I'm going to try to draw you out and be a little specific real quick. That some of you should be able to punch almost a brand new window in the side of your present yellow circuit wall. And maybe see something that I've talked about for a long time, and I'm sure some of you have felt as though you have been running up against which some of you feel as though you have been running. such things as the example I used, if you were able to follow it, that do you not find it strange, if you can see it right quickly, that life would have religions and other human institutions apparently of that similar general ilk that seem to be in charge of changing man, and of course, apparently for the better, that given the two choices, as I have described them in this area, that they could be trying to affect the way man acts or the way he thinks about acting, that they pick out the harder of the two, almost exclusively. Why would life do that? Is that, in fact, a valid observation? Why is it that I can so often, again, if you are able to follow what I'm doing at the time, can point out that life would seem to be having humanity operate almost at loggerheads to itself? All that would be, and now we've got to talk about superlogical, but all that would be superlogical in a 4 or a 5D world, when it's seen partially from a 3D level, it is always apparently illogical and or ironic. That is, that the ends oftentimes are palpably antipodal to the originalist stated aim, that humans individually, organizations, institutions, whole groups of humans say, not just some group of weirdos, but respected institutions, historically valid estates within the civilization of humanity, state that their purpose is such and such, and you listen to them, you apparently hear what they say with 3D consciousness, you're apparently on the same wavelength that some group says, our purpose is to do such and such. Our purpose is to help the poor. And then 6 months later you find that they're using poor people to fire up their stoves during the winter. Now this meets the criteria of one of the definitions of ironic, that the end result of what takes place apparently is just the opposite from what the stated purpose was. Now people have been pointing that out, certain parts of life's body, smart alecks, critics, epigrammatic writers have been pointing out for years this kind of apparent folly. But it's not folly. It is imperfect, incomplete information. And it cannot be otherwise. It is the source of all so-called confusion. It is also the source of what is normally referred to as the miraculous and the supernatural. But now the purpose of the board. I want to try and show you something. We could call it insufficient addition, disjointed addition. And this is a kind of exposition of something I mentioned many months ago. And the incomplete addition operates thusly: that human consciousness always believes that it sees two terms going on. And I'm just going to arbitrarily put numbers on them, and let's say that they see the term 1 and the term 2 in all situations. The addition, of course, is expected to put out 3. But what ordinary consciousness can never see, well, let me be magnanimous, as is my wont, and point out to you that it does not usually see this part of every triad going on in our world, that it normally does not take that into account whatsoever. Now, it absolutely, it has no recourse in the matter, no alternative. Recall, does that red line show up? The level of ordinary consciousness absolutely precludes it ever seeing a 4th term. So using these figures, in this situation, whatever it was, that a philosopher was trying to figure out the weighty problem of is there a reality out there or only the reality we imagine? A theologian trying to picture how could there be a God that was all-powerful that let all this crap go on and my shoes wear out within 6 months? An ordinary person thinking, how can I mean so well and good in life and then everybody pisses on my foot? All that sort of thing. So they're always expecting a 3. Cause and effect, logic, reason, goodness, mercy, justice, the American way of life, the Russian way of life. But based on these figures, what you're going to come up with is a 10. But under ordinary conditions, under the best conditions, an ordinary person is still going to be looking for a what? A 6. But that's really, I'm being magnanimous to the point that I should be arrested. Because ordinary consciousness is always looking, under these conditions, for a 3, for a 1 and a 2, for an I and a not I, for a C plus a D, for what I want plus the opposition of what I want, for what I expect plus the probability that I'll be disappointed. It's all a matter to ordinary consciousness. Don't let them out. Don't choke on this because you got all this information in you. It's just never been clarified. Such as heating up butter. That whatever you do, whatever you think about acting, whatever you think about ordinary, in the ordinary sense of other people acting, when you think about how humanity has acted, what you're doing is adding 1 and 2. You only perceive 2 terms, and you expect 3, always. And it's logical. And what do you get? Now I'm telling you, what you're normally talking about is a 10. Not a 3.5, not a 2.8, a 10. But even in moments, and this is not the norm, but even in moments that someone could just almost accidentally, this happens in life, take into account, they would not know what to call it, it would almost be a moment of passing epiphany of some sort. If they took into account the irrelevant, the 3rd factor, they would still only come up with 6. And 10 always being the result in this situation. Everyone is always confused. There is no answer to the unanswerable questions of life. Not here, because the equation, the addition, is always incomplete. Always. This is why things appear to ordinary consciousness to be chaotic. This is why things appear to be, in that sense of the word, ironic. That I try to go from here to there, and by all logic, me being, says the person, a not uneducated man or woman, I have done all that's required, all that I've read about. In fact, what seems to touch my little soul and conscience and tells me what to do, I did it, and what happened? It never comes out right. There it is. But ordinary consciousness, this is not going to happen because one thing triggers another. But if ordinary people, just from this line down, could suddenly, everywhere, be 3D conscious all the time, and they took into account the E. They took into account always the 3rd leg of the triad. They would still be confronted with the illogical, the irrational, the chaotic, the ironic. And they would curse everything, blame everything, look everywhere except the right place. How about all the good old questions? You don't have to be a philosopher. I keep using their own term about cause and effect, which is simply a variation, if you can follow up by now, if you can get close to a 3D level, it's simply a variation of the question between heredity and environment. But cause and effect. Ordinary consciousness tries to pick out a piece of history, something that happened this week, something that happened last week. The problem's in the Middle East right now. In the middle of terra firma, the Mediterranean, the erstwhile Persians now posing as Iranians and the trouble they seem to be causing the world. And some political observer says, yay, but notice what the United States did of throwing out their government 30 years ago and putting in a puppet government. No wonder they hate us. And then somebody says, yeah, but do you know what the government of the United States helped overthrow what they were doing to the people? When you start talking about cause and effect, there is no place to finally lay the blame. And of course, ordinary consciousness cannot even deal with it on that basis. Ordinary consciousness will pick out somewhere that, yes, I'm shy around women, but I'll tell you why. Because my father used to walk around with women he'd pick up, and they'd expose themselves and then laugh at me. So that explains it. That's why I am so fucked up. So intercourse up. Ordinary consciousness cannot then deal with any question about, well, all right, if that is true, if your father is the cause of your problems, what caused him to be that way? It cannot deal with it. I can make jokes and say, who cares, and all that. But ordinary consciousness, look into your own nervous system. Before you run across this, operating at your own level, it would still be true. Nobody can take this idea of cause and effect past their own existence. You can describe it several ways. You can say you're not interested. You can say, if you don't see somebody's eyes glaze over, just let them tell you their problems, and then you ask them, well, what do you attribute to what do you attribute this? And they say, my mother, my father, peer pressure, and then you start about, all right, how did that happen? If you don't see eyes glaze over, you don't have to, if you don't see glaze, you don't have to go to a Dunkin' Donut store. Look at their eyes. And you can say, well, nobody cares. The energy needed to propel an ordinary person's consciousness in those areas is not there. You try to feed it to them, and they are not structured to take in this kind of energy and to transform it and to use it. And all it does is put them to sleep, bore them. Nobody's interested. Humanity does not need to be involved with that for life's purposes at the present time. And so the blame is always laid at present conditions, a present generation. Us Iranians are mad, but we're mad because of what was done to us by country X last year, 2 years ago. And to say, well, look, what caused them to do that? Glaze time. It is true with individuals, it is true with large groups, it is true with history. History does not, you pick up, it turns to a chapter, the Middle Ages, and it starts talking about what happened to the Franks. And then it tells, well, they did so-and-so, but they were driven from such and such area 20 years before. And you think, wait a minute, I missed something, and you back up a few pages to see what caused that. It doesn't say. Human consciousness does not work like that. If it did, it would be forced into a 4D world. It would be forced into, which of course it cannot be forced into. What I'm saying is this would be, for force, what would happen? It would be forced into a seamless panorama of which time was the backdrop. And it could not stop, as ordinary consciousness is now constructed to do, to stop in one place and say, all right, this caused that. Because the most logical of 3D minds will glaze over. And it's almost an admission, if you can see it a certain way, to ask that sort of person, that kind of energy transformer called a person with that particular kind, and say, all right, what you're calling cause and effect, what caused that cause? And if they're real philosophical, they'll even start mumbling things like, oh no, some sophomore is going to try to get me to admit that God set up a big old clock and put it in motion. Give me a break, I went through school and I got my PhD. Don't start that. Consciousness simply cannot deal with it. It's not meant to deal with it. All so-called confusion about thinking of human action can be laid to that. I can describe it other ways, but this is the way I am giving you a good, although it's drawn here on a plane, it is pushing 3D limits. This is a valid description of what's going on. If there is this, to use this plane that I've drawn, it would be not just a triad, but it would then be a diamond. And one of them is beyond the limits of ordinary consciousness. Doesn't matter how intelligent you are, etc., how talented, it is beyond that limit. And yet it's affecting things here. It'd be the same kind of idea that humanity has had driven through it in past times to say that the gods in some way are interfering or participating in human life. And in past times, some of the glory days, let us say of Rome or Greece, the gods came in, they'd fool somebody's wife, they'd take their money, they'd cheat them, they'd kill them, then they'd disappear for a while and come back. All of that's kind of hints. But there is a continuing, there is a non-stop. If we're not talking about gods now, which of course we're not, we're talking about the reality of energy that's coming. Of course, I just drew it here up. There is no up, unless you know better. That the energy is continuing to run through a loop, through a process, and it's coming here, and humanity cannot see it. And so you're always dealing with an incomplete equation, incomplete addition. You're always dealing with imperfect data. It doesn't matter how big the telescope is, how big the atom smasher is. It does not matter the degree, the amount of education you have, the amount of dope you can smoke or take in your body in other ways. It doesn't matter that you can sit around and drink so much coffee that you feel like your brain is wired and you can imagine things nobody's ever imagined. Maybe, but you can't imagine that. Even if I draw it for you, you can't imagine it. You can go, yeah, I understand that. Oh, you have picked up the idea perhaps, and now you are thinking about it. But as far as this affecting your behavior, we're talking about two different things. The unanswerable questions of life can be laid right there. All of them, whether they were couched the way you first heard them in religious terms, philosophical terms, or just things that seem to bother your own little noodle. That how can this be? There it is. There's how it can be. That no matter what you do, at the ordinary level, you are always dealing with incomplete data. Always. Always. Which is the real joke in reality when I keep throwing in my little caveat. It's not to cover my own ass, my own derriere. So I told you I was going to quit doing that shit, that stuff. When I keep pointing out the limits of words. It's not that words are at fault. Words are great little guys. But anything that can be imparted at this ordinary level, which we're left at the ordinary level if the only way that we're passing energy, that is, the only way we're communicating, is on the basis that I'm sending out sound waves and they're affecting your little eardrummers. If that's it, then you're always going to be missing a part of the information loop, of the energy route. And so no matter what you think you get from me or anywhere else, is always, without exception, incomplete. It is always imperfect. It always leaves unanswered questions. Or as some would-be philosophers on the ordinary level keep pointing out, that every time that we seem to come up with a new solution or a new answer, it presents a new what? Question. That there is no end to it. That's true. Because there is always a piece missing. Always. There's also, there's no great reason to stay here, but it's also a basis of what ordinary consciousness always is referred to as the miraculous, the inexplicable, vis-a-vis belief in supernatural. There's your supernatural. You want to talk supernatural, Mama? There's supernatural. The part you can't see, the part that cannot be taken into account. Certainly a supernatural. And so the dreams of people who believe that they might be interested in a revolution is always a dream of something so fantastic, such as there's this little guy with a beard living in a cave in India. Boy, how fantastic. That's fantastic. It's fantastic because they can't get to him. Missing information, the missing piece. And it's not in the little old man in India. It's there. The missing information. A few more things I want you to buckle up under. face up to that continue to pop up. There is a certain kind, I'm not going to try to make up any real strange term, there's a certain kind of yellow circuit / verbal / literacy that is wired up in people, and it cannot be taught. And we run across this when I'm having you people translate or transcribe these tapes on the paper, and I've had some of you try to edit. Now, all of you should be big boys and girls by now. And all of you should recognize that, molecularly speaking, the chemistry, the basis of people, even here, people attracted to this. There are people in here who cannot carry a tune musically. And there are people that if we all sold all of our early belongings and hired Carlos Menotti or somebody to come down and teach this person day in and day out, they would never get any better. There are people, it hurts me and frightens me to say this, but there are people in here that are this close to having no sense of rhythm. They cannot pat their foot to a song. Again, we could sell all our belongings and hire whoever the current conductor of the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey circus band, and to stand here and to play a bass drum and to beat you on the head forever, and still with on a good Purcell album or James Brown, and everybody else go, here it goes, and you'd go. That's the way it is. But something I have never noted, and some of you find yourself running up against this, and some of you run up against it and have yet to notice it, and so I'm going to mention it. There's a kind of literacy. Now, of course, I don't mean that you can just read and write, but there is a kind of literacy that cannot be taught, and that people are born wired up with it, and some are not. This kind of unexpected information I bring to you, not for the sake of any pessimism, because the few kinds of people that belong in this, when they hear that which is correct, they should relish it. The information, in fact, the closer it becomes personal, the more they should find it to be salutary. There should be a kind of joy in it that very few of you can handle on a consistent basis. But to realize suddenly, which of course is not true because insight does not happen over when? Night. It just appears to, because of such matters as this. But to discover, to come face to face with the fact that I personally, as far as I can tell, cannot naturally pat my foot on a beat. I don't even know, to tell you the truth, what everybody else is talking about when they talk about the beat. I hear the noise, and they can say, listen to the drums, and I hear the noise. But to talk about a rhythm that's it's a word. I don't know what it is. To hearing melody, it's just all noise. Some of it I know they call music, and I can hear it go up and down, but it's noise. And it's been noise to me for 40 years. It's still noise, and apparently, based on what he said, and I'm telling you the truth, it's not going to change. To be faced with that, it's not going to change without an extraordinary series of events, of actions and plans of actions. And so you're faced with this, that here it is 40 years that I cannot carry a tune. I can't even tell what one tune is. I don't know one song from another. It's just all noise. So as far as I can tell, it's always going to be noise to me unless I expended some great amount of energy if I knew some method to do it. And I must admit to myself right now, if I knew such a method and it cost that great deal of energy, since I've gone 40 years not knowing what a tune sounds like, I wouldn't spend the energy. I'm going to die not knowing what a song sounds like. It would not be a form of discouragement, any form of pessimism. With a proper person, there is a kind of relish to it. it has a kind of curative effect to it. Really, some of you have been through this, but it is a hard apple to chew on every day. And some of you have done it once, and then a dozen times after that, felt as though you stumped your toe, or felt as though I was attacking you unfairly, or that I was making some comment in general about humanity that went overboard. And of course, the reason you felt it went overboard is because it sounded like, well, I fall in that group. The right people relish this kind of information, not just in general because it's new, astounding data, but the closer it gets to being personal, the closer it gets to stepping on my private parts and urinating on my foot, the closer this kind of information suddenly is eyeball to eyeball with me, and when I'm looking to see to whom does this apply, I see, moi, there is not a better example in the world than me. There is a relish to it. Do your worst. Of course, life can't do its worst. Whatever its worst was done to you when you were born here. It hadn't gotten any worse. You just gotten older, crankier. All machines begin to wear, and their tolerance becomes less and less, and they get shaky. Belts begin to wear thin. Bearings begin to wear out. But the worst has been done. To find new information, to be confronted with new data about yourself, or new data and you see this applies to me, only ordinary people get upset. Only ordinary people get discouraged. Only ordinary people feel, gee, too bad for me. It's ironic. But the few people, the proper people, find it stimulating, refreshing. All these years I felt such and such a way, a certain kind of negative attitude towards certain people, and I just realized I'm a better example of that than any of those people, which I've warned you about that. It's a test going on. All those people that you laughed at and got mad at, they were laughing at you. You were failing the test day in and day out, scores of years. But to realize I am better, worse, I am a better example of that behavior than those people ever were. I mean, if we're going to start talking about a whining, dunderheaded redneck, and all my life I've been mad at them and felt a kind of just instinctive, justifiable hostility. Those people are sophisticated New Yorkers, Connecticuters, compared to me. Now, if ordinary people were confronted and could be made to see such things as this throughout their life, you do understand it would not be a cause for rejoicing. It usually leads to a party consisting mainly of fists and teeth that you're being unjustly accused. I am surrounded by Philistines, talebearers, gossipers, people sticking their nose in my business. But to see it for yourself, another piece. Since the last few weeks, things have come up, and I mentioned about possessions. Why is it, do you imagine, that all religions everywhere badmouth material possessions? Why? Come on, damn it, we hadn't got all night. Think about it right quick. Why is it? And of course, I mean, to forget all the theological arguments you ever heard growing up in your religion, I'm asking you, what is it that the guides, if we were religious, if we're going to deal with their ball game, what is it that the guides have got against material possessions? Why do all religions badmouth them? Why? Well, let me see if I can push you at least into 3.2D considerations. That the harm in possessions, not to ordinary people, but for your consideration here tonight on the verge of the twilight parking zone, is in having, keeping, and thinking about possessions that are either non-laboring or non-lookers. That is, for you, their master, they satisfy neither a sense of beauty nor utility. That is what is condemnable. That is what has an adverse effect on your energy. Is to have, to keep, to think about. And by think about, I even mean to plan for additions of possessions that to you have not proven to be useful nor to please your sense of beauty. That they either do not save you labor or they're not lookers. As always in the 3D world, I can challenge you that my division into all possessions is either being utilitarian or attractive can encompass and can eat up all 3D views. One immediate example I point out to you. How about humanity's attitude toward the automobile? I can divide up all of humanity. I can even divide the sexes almost. It's changing slightly as we stand here, but into the two camps of those that look at an automobile who plan to get one, who do get one, who keep it, and if they ever think about it, they do it on the basis of it's a labor-saving device. It saves me from running everywhere. It is useful. And you talk to people such as that about, well, the lines of that car are not, it doesn't say much for the design team, and their eyes begin to glaze over. Don't you ever wash your car? When the windshield gets so dirty I can't see, yeah, well, what are you talking about? And then there are people. It's not that one's right and one's wrong, and then there are people that think about, who plan, who buy, and then who upkeep an automobile, and the basis seems to be on what? The focus seems to be on the beauty of it. Now this, of course, expands into other fields about how beautiful you look in it. But we're still talking about that the basis is not on the usefulness of it. It's on the attractiveness of it. To look at it. To stand back and look at it. Have other people look at it and say, my, what a pretty car. For you to look at it and think, my, what a pretty car. Up until now, as I've said, it's of no great importance, but you could almost divide the sexes up on this planet. Those that, where the automobile is readily available and important. That women in general, a car was just something that you used. And of course, there are men that way. But if you're going to talk about a group who found the car to fulfill a purpose of beauty as opposed to utility, then you'd be talking about exclusively a group of men. There is another connection between possessions and about them either being beautiful or useful. And that has to do with actions and thinking of actions. And that is, I'm suggesting to you, the condemnation, the reality of it, of material possessions, which I'm trying to expand for you very quickly verbally, into not just material possessions, but in keeping and having and keeping and then thinking about possessions that serve neither of those purposes for you. Then the connection I'm going to speed by very quickly between actions and thinking of actions is having possessions that do not now meet the expectations you had when you were thinking of the actions of acquiring them. Now this is a closer 3.5D, I hesitate to say 4D, but 3.5D of reality behind the apparent feeling of religions that material possessions per se can be sinful, can keep you from progressing spiritually in some way. You're expending energy, holding on to these possessions, thinking about them, when the reality is that they are now not in action serving the purpose that you thought about the actions when you plotted, planned, worked for, paid for, went in debt for to get them. And now you got them or it. And I can bring it down to a cruder verbal level. It don't do what you thought it would do. If it was useful, you read all consumer reports, you took all your brothers-in-law's advice, and this car is still a lemon. And yet you hold on to it. Or the belief that if I just had a car that looked like this, my sex life would improve, my hair would begin to fill back out, everything would be just fine, and you got it, and you still sit at home and look at your toenails every night. The thoughts of action, of acquiring and having and using this, the action itself, the reality of it never met the thinking of the action. That would be a 3D, 3.5D reality closer to reality of what the religions imagine having these possessions are in some way harmful. They are a drain, they are a use, a direction, in our case, I'd have to say a misuse of energy that you should be using somewhere else, being tied to these, of thinking about them, of feeling guilty that I went to all the trouble to get these, to look around at it, what in the hell am I doing with this? Every time you walk through the room, you look at this thing, or the garage, and the number flashes. $9,640, or whatever it is. And you see it, and there it is. It is a misuse of energy. Plus, I might point out, I mentioned in passing already, but a real revolutionist needs to stay fairly lean, stripped, be able to live almost out of a suitcase since he's out in the bushes. He should not be encumbered with a lot of baggage, not just in here, not in this good old spiritual and psychological way, but out there. There is a reality, as always, behind these religions' ideas, what life has put to ordinary man at this kind of level, an incomplete level, that in some way material possessions can actually be a detriment. It might keep one from reaching fulfillment, it might keep one from attaining or dreaming correctly of paradise or some great reward. There is a reality to it, but it's not in the possession themselves. It's of you being wired up in a certain position that you got caught up planning for, expending your energy on the possessions that end up being neither to you beautiful nor useful. And they are baggage. They become stuff that you got to drag through the bushes. That, I suggest you, is closer to the reality than any idea of sin about the possession itself. But you should find it interesting that it has been a source of condemnation and suspicion throughout man's history. One more thing before I get to the list. I mentioned before about that real revolutionists shouldn't get involved with fads. That is a fact. I just put it out sort of as a little rule, or what should have been a rule to a real revolutionist. But there is a scientific, in this kind of world, there's a basis for this. The avoidance of fads, whatever it is. If suddenly the fad is to be concerned about the environment, which I guess is already fading. Whatever the current fad is, why you should be avoiding it is the, and you surely know what I mean by fad. It doesn't matter what area it seems to be in. The fad is being produced and it's being fueled by a most common de-endangered energy. It is like herd energy. It serves a purpose, but a revolutionist, you people, a would-be revolutionist, should have no part of it. Even if you were interested, let us say in environmental stuff, 15 years ago, and suddenly it became a fad, if you understood this correctly, you would have turned your back and walked away from it until further notice. Because now, well, unless you knew what you were doing, unless you could carry on yourself. But for you to suddenly join in a fad, and it doesn't matter what the apparent aim of it is. The apparent aim of it may be the kind of aim that you would support. But if it is suddenly faddish, then you're talking about a temporary, as they all are, but an influx of energy flowing through large numbers of people for some purpose in life. But it is down at a very crude level, and it is always right on the verge of D. That's why all fads are so potentially inflammable. Now, what appears to be even good causes, like the environmental cause, let's all take good care of the earth since this is our home. You know, it would sound as though that is as innocuous as could be, but what happens? Every time you picked up the paper 15 years ago, it seems, there was fist fights at an ecological confrontation somewhere. And you'd think, well, that's what? That's illogical. That is ironic. That's like being beat up at a peace march. And yet that's the name of the game. If it's a fad, then you're talking about what amounts to a real basic, crude, boorish, D-endangered. It's always running right at the edge of D, kind of herd energy. And you have got no business being there. No matter if the apparent aim is something that you would agree with, properly so. Or even if it was something that I might agree with and tell you that is a good aim. Because there's just no doubt that's a good aim. But if that's suddenly a fad, then something is about to change with it. You can take that as a safe prediction. And you should not be running with the herd. You should not be letting that kind of very common, most common denominators of energy at that time, you should not be letting that touch you insofar as you can help it. Do not be a part of fads. I don't care if the fad is, hey, let's all ignite our higher circuits we read about somewhere and all become real good people and love each other. If that's suddenly faddish, run for it. Stay in the closet. Come find me and we'll go off until it blows over. I am now going to go back to the list. You remember last week? Now I'm going to run through the ones that I wrote down, that if indeed we had rules and regulations and I was giving out homilies, if I'm sure what those are, little words of wisdom, things that you should live by. If you recall, I'm bringing you up to date for last week, those of you who missed part 1723 in this continuing saga of Inside at the Outside. That's a variation of a well-known British series, and I can't back up and explain all these. But I wrote these down, as I just said, and thought about them in no particular order, and I was going to see what comments I had to make is where I started last week, and I got through about half of them. As I'm doing this, there is a connection between my possible comments on these lists and the kinds of things I've already been talking about tonight. Apparently, it is much easier to reform how one thinks about acting than how one acts. Try and keep that up here, coevally as I am describing these. Or to think about, not right now, but later, the 10 Commandments, the 14 Commandments, Murray's Commandments in some other religion, Hindu rules of order, all of the so-called maxims, standards, commandments of all the religions, what do they address themselves in those two potential areas? Action or the thinking of action? And which is it that it can apparently change? And how simple it is that you can get people to apparently accept new ideas, which is thinking of action. If you recall from last week, many times in my little rules, my list of rules, if there were rules, was don't get in debt. Get out of debt. Don't go in debt. And how easy it is that many of you, if the truth are known, and I'm going to probably lay on it a little more tonight, that you could hear that and go, Jesus, that's true. I knew that. And that fast, if we were under different circumstances, or something could remind you of this. You'd be staying in a store, and somebody in front of you hands out their credit card, and the line there at Kmart, and they run it through their machine, and what they do, and it spits it back and says, no way, Jose. And the person says, oh my God, I'm over the limit again. And suddenly you think about me bad-mouthing being in debt, telling you got no business, molecularly, chemically being in debt. And there you stand right then and thinking how great it is to be exposed to this kind of astounding new information from me and how good it is. And suddenly the person moves, and while you're thinking that, you reach and you hand your credit card. That is the difference. That's not an attack on humanity, but that is the difference, that the thinking of action, you can apparently accept a whole new idea that, hey, that's true. Boy, screw going in debt. And then they say next, and you say, oh, you take MasterCard, and you don't even notice it. You're not supposed to notice it. But thinking of action may or may not bear at any particular time any specific relationship to one's action. If they were tied inexplicably together, if there was no tolerance there, nothing would get what? Done. Nothing. If people didn't act like they are, they wouldn't be people. I'm going to pick back up where I believe I left off last week. If you let feeling sorry for yourself become electrical, if you let it rise from the chemical and it becomes electrified in you, if you let feeling sorry for yourself become electrical, you cease having a real self. You become the thought. You become the electrical charge. If we move a little further back down to speak simultaneously with what can go on chemically, that is what you feel, not what you think, your feeling has now merged with that. All of your feeling apparatus, all of your blue circuits are involved with it totally, that is taking up the full channels of the flow of information, and there is no self. That's why it is, if you recall one time I pointed out to you, it's not good, it's not proper to say that you are mad. You're madness. The mood is you. There is nothing else if you're ordinary. Ordinary emotions become the person at the time. In the same way as why I use that French term idée fixe. So whatever it is that has now become electrical, that you're so mad about what was just said to you, you cease to exist. The feeling sorry for yourself is just one that is not normally addressed in religions and that people don't normally think about, because people normally feel as though there's some justification for feeling sorry for myself. I have been disappointed. Really? You know why? Because you can't fucking add. I said fucking on purpose. I have been disappointed. You know why? You can't count. What you planned on. It's not, of course, that you can't count, but what you planned on, what you based all of your little plans on as best you could, always was missing important terms. To say that you're disappointed is to say the obvious. To say that you're disappointed is to say that you're alive. To say that you've been disappointed is to admit, well, okay, I'm human. It's also to admit, unbeknownst to you, that I have insufficient information. Always have, always will. So what's there to feel sorry for? Well, a woman has just made either a shadow figure at me that looks like a bunny, or else it is some kind of Armenian gesture that I don't want to go into, or else the tape is run over. I'm going to assume it's the latter. Next one. Look after yourself. But don't always conceive of your fortunes, your good luck, as being only at the expense of others. Now, at the 3D level, I continue to use the term, if any of you have noticed, about a closed system, which of course is not true, or there would not be another dimension. There would not be the missing information. But all 3D consciousness can see, all the way from the religious, so-called religious thinkers of 2,000 years ago, the creators of mythology of 4,000 years ago, up until the scientists of today, they're still being left with the apparent black hole imagination notwithstanding, that matter can be neither created nor destroyed, and that energy doesn't disappear, that energy is not created, and it's all interchangeable. That if you have something, if you've got 50 new gold pieces that you didn't have yesterday, that means that somewhere somebody is out 50 gold pieces. Or else 50 people are out 1 gold piece. Or else 25 people are out 2 gold pieces, and etc. That we're all locked into a closet, as I said, and there's a whole bunch of toys, and all they do is they get shifted around. If you got a new car, that means that whatever amount of effort and energy you expended to buy this car came from somewhere else. So in a sense, your fortunes are always at the expense of someone else. But you are making a molecular faux pas. You are harming yourself if you conceive that your good fortune is only at someone else's expense. That is not the way it is. That is the way that it can appear to be at 3D level. And to some of the capitalistic buccaneers and the robber barons of life, they even apparently relish the thought that, hey, I'm richer today, and that means that some of my enemies or even strangers are poorer. Ha, ha, ha. Everybody needs a hobby, but that should not be your hobby. Your good fortune, your increasing fortunes, or whatever be their nature, should not be thought of as being at someone else's expense, that I have done better today, this week, this year, and that means that somebody has done worse. Hopefully, people I know personally and don't like. That's always right. Stare not. That was one of those of you who missed it, one of the original tricks, tasks I gave to people is to quit staring. It's the nature of man to want to stare, but you should be continually trying to case the joint. You are to be as a real revolutionist should be, or a would-be little John Dillon. A Willie Sutton. Everywhere you go, you should immediately case the joint. If you step out in the backyard and you're used to it, you don't have to look. You can go out in the days before you've had your coffee in the morning, or it can be the middle of the afternoon. To be as a real revolutionist should be, or a would-be little John Dillon. A Willie Sutton. Everywhere you go, you should immediately case the joint. If you step out in the backyard and you're used to it, you don't have to look. You can go out in the days before you've had your coffee in the morning, or it can be the middle of the afternoon. Your body, the red circuits, know where everything is, and you just walk out, and suddenly a hippo in a carp uniform could jump out of the bushes, or could be standing over here in the bushes, and you could be out in the backyard spitting and kicking rocks for 10 minutes before you happen to turn around and realize you should always be casing the joint. You simply should. It is molecular stagnation. It is the reinforcement of your own chemical and electrical patterns to stare, to not try, for no particular reason, not to show off. But you should continually try and be alert. And you should, every time you walk from one room to another, whether it's at your own house, not just new places, but in your own house, as soon as you step out one room into another, you should case a joint. Who knows what's going on there? I don't want to frighten you, but things could be going on, and you could walk through, like you do at home, and you could walk through and never even notice what's going on. There could be, not in some other galaxy, but one of these 4D holes might show up in your hallway, and something might be there, and you miss it. Because you're just staring and shuffling along. And of course, closely tied to that is stare not, debt not. And when I got on that kick, if you remember, then the next one reads, hangeth not around dumb, currish people. Several weeks ago pointed out to you why that if you hang around dumb people, you get dumb. And those of you that like to take these things internally, so be it. Those of you that receive some external use for it, you got it. But do not hang around dumb people. If you do, don't cry to me. If you do, don't even cry to yourself. at least once a day, be amazed at the fact of you and this coming together. Even the days you can't really feel it, you should sure try it. You should try. You should try and remember that there have been times, maybe yesterday, maybe even earlier this morning before you know what happened to me, that I was thinking about it and I was just absolutely amazed, just astounded, and I grinned so hard that it made my ears hurt. It's just amazing. Just amazing for no particular reason. But you should be amazed and you should fake it. Even if today, of course I can understand what a horrible day it's been, but even though you can't seem to naturally feel it, you should try to. You should just stop and be amazed. You should be amazed that I'm not amazed right now. You should be amazed that I have been amazed before, and right now I can't be amazed, and evidently it's because that somebody told me it looks like I'd put on a few pounds. Somebody I barely know, and it's been about 9 hours ago. Next one. Hurteth not thy back whenever possible. I don't know what lasting good this will do in the 3D world, but I couldn't resist passing up the opportunity to say whenever possible, hurt not thy back. I'm sure that I can speak for most of you and say that if your back would cooperate, that would probably be your intention. Be secretly better than your religion. That is, by your religion, I mean whatever you apparently were brought up in, what your molecules still seem to have a propensity to react to. And whatever your religion said, that if you were a good blank, your behavior would be such and such. Of course, none of the people can do it, but that is life having religions talk about. Your actions should change. And of course, over a long period of time, humanity's actions do change, and life obviously is benefiting from it. Life hadn't done us in yet, so thus far we're serving the purpose. But you few people that by now had darn well better be over. I didn't say darn. Had better be over worrying about man-made religion, 3D religion, and all that it implies. But there is an absolutely usable benchmark that you can take your religion, your parents' religion, as being one of the supreme tests that you have been given, one of those secret tests. To just take this, because if you can throw in this loop, what I'm telling you is not just a joke. It's not just something silly I made up. What apparently was your parents' religion? Catholicism, Judaism, Methodicism, whatever it is. There is a distinct possibility, I'm suggesting, that was simply, now regardless of the fact that you tried to laugh at it, you tried to get away from it, you made fun of it, it was what? Irrational. It was even ironic at times. Yeah. What you don't understand was it was a test just for you, just to see how you'd react. And they're all laughing. And you saying, well, why should I try and be a such and such? My parents can't even do it. The head minister can't even do it. The head priest can't do it. You weren't even trying to do it. It was just a test to see how dumb you still were. And you got mad. You thought that you were a social critic. You thought you were smarter than they were. If they keep talking about that they should be doing so and so, trying to tell me to do it, and they can't do it. Hey, I'm too smart for them. And they thought, well, the young fucker failed again. Once a pinhead, I guess always a pinhead. You can take it as being an absolutely valid and quite useful benchmark that you secretly have got to be better than your religion taught. You got to be better than the best walking example of that religion, which would be imperfect, to say the least. on this planet. You've got to be better than that. There is a way to use it. Whatever it taught. You should be secretly better than the best example they could come up with. You should be closer to being an actual real Catholic, a real Jew, a real Hindu, than whoever would be considered the greatest living Christian, Jew, or Hindu, or Muslim. Of course, you'd be doing it secretly. But just what would apparently be the native, natural, God-blessed behavior of such a person, that should be, from your view, minimal or minimum operating procedure every day. Rejoice only slightly, in a controlled manner, at injuries suffered by hunters and fishermen. Yeah, I will. I'll try to contain my enthusiasm and my... We all know a joke when we hear one, don't we? Yeah, and I didn't hear one. On to the next page, even. There's 2 pages? You don't say. I didn't know I could write 2 pages worth of stuff. Do more than merely think about things that truly interest you. And they're things that apparently have to do with the realm of the thinking mechanisms, the yellow circuits, writing. But do more than think about them. Or else the kind of molecular energy, the kind of need, the kind of fuel that you at one time could have used, I'm not trying to give you the blues again, but if you keep ignoring it, the day can come up fairly quickly that you can't seem to raise the energy to pursue it anymore. Then you can even, in a weak moment, want to turn to me and say, give me something new, interesting to do. You can think that being involved with this in some way is to blame for your new level of ennui. And if this thing made gestures, it would think, you poor pinhead, you missed it again. Do not simply think about it. If you've got a true interest in something, do more than think about it. And of course, the true interest is not contingent upon imaginary outcomes. What if I sit down and write this book? Yeah, I've had a plan. I've had a plan for a novel that'd knock your socks off. But I know how things go. You've got to have an agent. You've got to be in New York. I mean, you've got to be somebody. I'll sit down. I know what will happen. I'll sit there and I'll tap my little fingers to the bone and I'll rewrite it. And I'll spend big money on the reams of paper. And I'll send it off. You know what will happen? They'll send it back and they won't even read it. They'll just send it back and say, well, no, we don't like the sound of your name. We don't like the postage, the kind of stamps you use. Or they'll write back and say, well, they'll send me a little form. After I work for 2 years, they're going to send me a little form that says, sorry, but this does not meet our present needs. That's just thinking about it. You're cheating yourself. And it's not just on the realm, as it never is, of just some sort of pinpoint of personal pleasure. It is all tied to this kind of activity. Next one, ask not for mercy, unless you're doing it willfully, or else that it's a last-ditch stand. Don't ever ask for mercy. I'm telling you not to, and it's not to put up a facade of being Superman or John Wayne or Superwoman or Wonder Woman. There is a chemical, then an electrical basis for this. It is don't ever ask for mercy unless you're willfully doing it. You know what means you know what you're doing, or my semi-facetious coda, or unless it's absolutely a last-ditch stand. And if it is, who am I to tell you not to ask for mercy? Of course, it works. I was about to say I don't give you the blues again, but I already said that. If it works, I got to point out to you the possibility that you may regret that you did it. That you look around and, ooh, I'm still alive. Now I got to think about what I did. Yeah, I'm the only one still got my fingernails left. And then you're the outcast. Not because of physically what happened, but because of what you did with the energy, that you asked for mercy. There's no such thing as mercy. To ask for mercy, you believe that in some way life meters out rewards and punishments. You got to believe in cause and effect. You got to be limited to two little eyeballs and one little teeny-weeny brain, one little teeny-weeny mechanism, trying always to make some logic, some sense out of this, when it is a foregone conclusion that your outlook is going to be foregone. Asking for mercy is like saying, can I have 1 second out before you step on this foot and then go to the other one? Could you just give me a second? That's the kind of belief it is. That in some way life is going to hand out punishments and rewards, and you've got to decide how exactly to act. And perhaps under these conditions, it would be proper to ask for mercy. You should never ask for mercy. You don't know what you're doing. Stand up straight. And when possible, always drop a few pounds. Treat everyone as your superior, but in a willfully indifferent style. That is, where no one knows what you're doing, especially other people. No, especially you. No, well, mainly that they don't. Well, it's one or the other. It's to treat everybody else as though they are your unrecognized, unspecified, undetermined, but that they are your superior, but you've got to do it in a willfully indifferent style. And it's either mainly that they don't know or mainly that you don't know, and I get confused on that one, so put down both possibilities, those of you taking notes. It's one or the other. And don't fault me just because I don't know exactly which one. I gave you both of them, so one of them's correct. At least I didn't present it in an indifferent style. Keep your personal life lean and neat. Straighten up your desk. If you feel, don't ask me, don't ask you, don't debate where it came from. If every time you pass the toothpaste, whether you're living alone or with someone, that something in you, molecules move around and up in your yellow circuit. And don't blame it just because you say, well, I hear my mother saying, put the tube back on the toothpaste for God's sake. So no consequence where it came from. Is every time you pass it, your feeling is, I should put it back on there, and I don't. Put it back on there. Put it back on there without fail. Put it back on there if the house is burning down. Put it back on there if the school bus is outside blowing the horn saying you're going to be late for class. If you wait and put that top on back on the toothpaste, do it anyway, and then think, why is the school bus here blowing the horn for me when I'm 47 years old? I don't know. I just relay this information. I don't know why. I guess they held you back more grades than even I ever imagined. Try, amongst all the other things, to always remember that everyone, and that means everyone alive, every human, does exactly what life has told them will be pleasant for them and is necessary. That's everybody. That's all the Attilas. That's all the anti-popes. That's Cardinal Fang. That's Hitler. That's Hitler's dear, dear grandmother. I assume he had one. I mean, I know he had one, but I assume she was a dear grandmother. All grandmothers seem to be dear. Everybody does what life tells them will be pleasant for them. But now you've got to understand, in a way in which still there seems to be a closed system at the 3D level, what's going to be pleasant for somebody is going to be less than pleasant for somebody else. There is the I hate to be crude, but why stop now? For every raper, there's got to be a rapee. How are thieves going to have fun if you're not around for them to mug you? How are you going to get the joy of cheating on your income tax unless there's that big old faceless government that's moving way too far to the right to suit me anyway? Hell with them. Well, I had to quit the church after they said blah, blah, blah. Boy, that's fun. That's perverse fun to insist if I'm having any effect, have any influence on you people. Always remember this. And you're never going to remember that. Nobody can remember that. What do you mean people are doing what life tells them is pleasant and they've got to? That sounds like some kind of really off-the-wall sermon. Because I don't know, sometimes it almost feels a little good in here, but I step right outside and goddamn people driving like maniacs, people running through red lights and almost hit me and then went to me. They're not doing that for them to be pleasant. They're doing that to make me mad. It's a show of hostility to me. It's got nothing to do with their pleasure. They're as mad and upset as I am. No, they're not. That's just your words. That's your description. That's you believing me and them equal three. But something ain't right. How come nobody gets their just desserts? If the chemical does not become electrical, then you don't think it. From the human 3D conscious level, if you don't let the chemical become electrical, you don't feel it. Humans, civilized, literate, in the ordinary sense, humans, which includes almost this entire planet right now, they do not truly experience an emotion until it becomes electrical. That is, until they can talk about it. And some of you wondered all this time why I don't talk much about emotions or tell you why not to talk about them. That's why. If that didn't make enough sense, that's why. The real revolutionists would be out in the bushes telling the recruits, if they could hear, not only hold that line, block that metaphor, don't think that thought, don't feel that feel. Yay, team. Don't do it. And if you can stop the chemical from becoming electrical, you won't think that thought. And in fact, you won't feel that feel. The chemical basis will be there, all right. But then you'll begin to physically, if you want it in that kind of crude terminology, you'll understand why I've talked about all this time, that, in a sense, way down there in the bowels of myself, there came a molecular uprising that said, we is mad. And I can literally, that is, physically, materially, be aware of this, and it would pass for part of me that's going on in me, and yet, not in some paradigmatic manner that I can separate myself from my baser instincts through meditation and through giving my money to the Swami. I can literally not feel the feel, not think the think. It's just there. It might as well be my stomach going brrr. But it was anger. It was righteous indignation even. I recognized I used to have it a lot before I found out about baking soda. But instead of this righteous indignation, instead of this desire for revenge, it's like rude noises down in my guts. You don't let rude noises become electrical. Not unless you're super sensitive, I don't know. Don't let the chemical become electrical. You can just take that until you understand yourself. You could take it as being an absolute revolutionary motto. What's that? You mean that? You're saying that, you're asking me, would you ever think anything again? Did you people hear that young lad's question? Shut up, kid. would we ever think anything again? Who let you in here? That's about the dumbest question I've ever heard. Thought he almost had me. Next one. Whenever you're asked what you believe in, always smile and say everything, and mean it. And even if you're not asked overtly, you're just joining in it. Other people talking about what they believe, and someone over here says, well, I can't really go along with that. And someone over here says, well, as a matter of fact, what I believe is just, as it were, diametrically opposed to what you believe. And you thinking off to yourself. The molecules beginning to run, the chemicals becoming electrical. Which side do I choose? I choose all sides. I don't believe in them, and I don't believe in them. I believe in all of it. And you got to smile, and you got to mean it. Because if you understood anything, you would mean it. What do you believe in, son? Sir, I believe in everything. What are you in favor of? You just name it. If they've come up now with a 34th flavor, I'll take it. You don't even have to tell me specifically the name of it. Just give me a double scoop. Pay all of your debts up and return there no more. I'm trying to make these suggestions, strong suggestions, but I would be well within my revolutionary rights and duties to find out how bad in debt some of you people are. Some of you I've found out without asking. And I would be well within my rights for your own welfare to give you some kind of time limit to absolutely get out of debt and do not ever get in debt again. Never. Unless it was for an absolute death-defying health reason. Because I don't care what the circumstance is. If you do not have the cash in the pocket to pay for it, forget it. Forget it until tomorrow. Some of you, that would be as good a move as you could make in your relationship to life and yourself as you are now hardwired is to stop it, is to get out of debt and to take whatever the means were, such as your credit card, and file them. File them in that great ceramic filing cabinet located in most people's bathroom. You got no business being in debt. It misuses energy. It misuses energy of thinking about actions, which is the worst in this relationship, and then it misuses actions. It has nothing to do with morality. It has nothing to do with faddish times. I'm telling you, just you. Other people, it doesn't matter. Other people, it can't matter. It'd wreck our economy. But I'm telling you people, you got no business being in debt. It is bad. It is bad, bad, bad. It is bad medicine. It is a bad chemical reaction. And it is a terrible electrical reaction. Terrible. And you know it. Those of you really in debt, those of you wired up to be that kind of people. If the truth were known, I ask you, what really bugs you the most? What do you worry about the most? There's some of you here now, and some of you are getting this on tape shortly hereafter. You would say, it's being in debt, me worrying about my creditors, being hounded by American Express, having to move every 2 weeks, and they keep following me. Bad news. Bad debts. Bad boys. You should continually be seeking privileged information from a secret position while attempting not to give out any information about yourself. That's not far removed from don't give interviews. It's not far removed from continually casing the joint. You should always be seeking privileged information. There's information out there coming from all quarters that you never get. Because you end up living face to face with everybody. Out there in the herd, everybody lives nose to nose. And worse, nose to other parts. You got to find a secret place. You got to be able to get out of everybody's face. You cannot live in the herd, even if you're physically in the herd. You got to find a privileged spot inside that you can continually case the joint, and that you're not face to face with everybody. It is a kind of secret position from which you can get privileged information. At the same time, be concerned over It's tied directly to it. One will cancel out the other. The lack of being able to do one will cancel out the other, and that is not letting privileged information about you out. Not because it's privileged, not because it's anything special. It's not. It's duck slop. It's garbage. Worse than that, it's boring. But don't let it out. You should not be letting out information about you once you find a secret position, because if you do, you lose your secret position. It's not the matter that the information is going to do you harm that you let out. That's not it. It's just letting out any information, you've given away your position. Then you lose that privileged position. Then you got to find a new one. You got to go out and reconnoiter, and you got to establish another one. Once you find a place internally that you find is kind of secret, and you can stand there apparently in everybody's face, and yet you're not, you can begin to get privileged information. You can begin to see past the 3D level. But don't let out any information about you. Or else suddenly everybody realizes, hey, he's been hiding in the bushes all this time. Hey, you come out of there. And then you're done for the time being. You've blown a good secret. You've blown a good position. Always be thinking, that is electrifying, more than two things at once. Don't do stuff you don't really want to do. Now this is hard to determine. Hard to determine. I mean, it's so hard to determine in some cases, I'm not even going to spend any more time dealing with that. But just, I'm telling you, don't do stuff you don't want to do. Yeah, kid, I admit it, it is hard to determine. You weren't listening. I said that twice. Next. Don't be cynical regarding how others have fun. Don't ever laugh at another person's hobby. Don't sneer. Don't ever be cynical at how they have fun. But always know where the back door is. Share when you want to, and when you can, and when you don't. That would be a four-dimensional, be closer to a four-dimensional reality of charity, of humility, of some kind of brotherly concern. Is to share when you can and when you want to, and when you don't. Do not confuse acting with thinking of acting. Well, that's certainly not your problem there. Treat everyone's autobiography as fiction, i.e., don't believe or disbelieve what people say about themselves. Just ignore it. Or treat it as meaningless noise or entertaining music. Everybody's autobiography, everybody gives out an interview, is dealing in fiction. Now, I know that wouldn't include you. But we're talking about it from your viewpoint, right? Treat everyone's autobiography. Now, in other words, once you understand that, it doesn't require in any way that you laugh at it, that you compare it with something else, you try to find the inconsistencies in it, you try to find the flaws, the holes. Nah, that's being cynical. They're having their fun. That's their hobby. They're doing what life told them would be fun. They're giving out an interview, whether you ask for one or not. They're saying, let me tell you what happened to me. What you're dealing with is fiction. Who but somebody living in New York or some other smart-aleck place would ever even dream up the idea of having people be professional critics for fiction? Think about it for a second. Time's up. I mean, if you really try and stretch your little taffy brain in all directions, you could almost see a purpose for every form of criticism, all the way from sports to politics to religion, except for one thing, fiction. How are you going to criticize in some so-called intellectual or academic manner fiction? Somebody says, here's a story I made up. You listen to it. How are you going to criticize it? Now, I know they do, but think about it a second. Are we about to turn oxymorons, are we about to spread them into a 3.5 dimension? The intellectual criticism of fiction. Think about it one more second. I still like it, even if you don't. What are you going to do? Say, well, that's a rotten story you made up. And sign your name to it and hope you get involved to other important publishing house parties in New York. Hey, there's the guy that said that your piece of fiction was real dumb. The point I am making, that if you can see it a little bit, once you understand that everybody's story, everybody's autobiography, is fiction, then how can you get entangled in it unless you're going to be supreme el stupido, unless you're going to be a walking dunderhead yourself, that your job in life is to criticize fiction. All you're going to say is, I don't like the fiction. That's it. You've said it. You're going to waste another 60 years saying it in different ways. But once you understand that everybody's story is fiction, then you can treat it. And what I was attempting to tell you verbally, or to point to, is would be closer to a real clinical view of it. It's not that you believe it or disbelieve it. That's not the function of fiction. If once you understand it's fiction, you're not involved with it. Wait a minute. The guy trying to tell me about when he was in Vietnam. How old is he? Is it even possible? And earlier he told me that he was in school in What the hell are you doing? You're treating it like it's a piece of nonfiction. You're treating it as though it's important, and you're trying to find some inconsistency. Once you understand it's fiction, you can do anything with fiction. Characters jump in and out of time, in and out of beds, in and out of planes, in and out of their underwear, in and out of their own opinions. How can you get entangled in it? What is there to criticize? How can you be cynical about fiction? You're just making it up. So it's not a matter that you believe it or disbelieve it. That is getting closer to being clinical. That is getting closer to a fourth dimension of understanding. You're getting past the point that it's either what? One or two. It's either true or false. He's either leveling with me or he's not. How can you lie about fiction? Or conversely, how can you tell the truth about fiction? Fiction's fiction. If you don't have a particular interest, you can take it as being meaningless noise, or on the other hand, you can take it as being a kind of temporarily entertaining music, but it's fiction. Of course, we're not talking about our own autobiography, except for you. Yeah. Get fresh air and solar food. Don't do that if it hurts. We all know that one. Do not be self-conscious unless you've got a self. Do not ever tell anyone seriously that you'll do something unless you will, or unless you fully didn't mean it. And such things do not apply to friends. Especially do not apply to your relationships here, but even out in life, people outside this that you try and consider to be a friend. But every other case, don't tell people you're going to do something unless you will do it, or unless you fully don't mean it. If you can do the latter, it's just as well if somebody say, hey, can I ask you a favor? And you either got nothing else to do, or they got you trapped in a corner. You say, what? And they say, will you do so-and-so? Say, sure. But you got to have absolutely, fully, no intention of doing it. And that's the same thing as saying it, that tell somebody that you'll seriously do it, and you will do it. It's got to be one or the other, or you will molecularly suffer from it. Do not let yourself feel distant or estranged from this activity without you noting that the feeling is one-sided, and that taken from my equation, the feeling is I-based. I. Appear not, another good. We're just talking about manners and social etiquette, right? You lost your mind. Appear not too scuffy or too weird. Never let them see you look mad or disappointed. Really. That is one of those that go, and once it is your burgeoning understanding begins to touch that one at all, it goes immediately into 4 dimensions. Never let them. I'm not going to tell you who apostrophe EM is. You can imagine who it is. Some of you think you know who it is, but don't let them ever see you mad or disappointed. Don't let them see it. It's poison to the system. It's bad news. It's not psychological bad news. It's not somebody saying, ooh, we got you. Of course, if you can still use that one as a method, they have got you. You failed the test again. You pinhead. Every time you get mad, you fail the test. But they all got together. The forces did. They're running them all the time, but you think you're something special. And here it is, you overslept again. And you pick up the clock and you throw it against the wall. You look down at your own self. You do anything and you get mad. They're there. I'm telling you, they're there, and you failed again. And they can't believe it. I don't know why they waste their time doing it much longer with you, except they do it with everybody. But you people think you're something special. But you got mad, you failed the test again, or you got disappointed. Oh, rats. When it comes to a reality, an attempt to focus oneself on a reality that is not yet apparent on a 3D level, is when you should be faking it. It is the reality behind what I meant by ODs, by operational directives, that you just know there is so much to this, I should be doing this. I don't even understand why I couldn't prove it. I don't even want to prove it. I don't want to debate it. You should not let them see you get mad or disappointed. Faking it is important, because faking it at a 3D level is a piece of reality at another level. Don't let them see you get mad or disappointed. And don't anybody play like you're the great bastard grandchild of Freud or Jung and say, well, that's not really going to work. You're right, it's not. Show those people the door. It's not going to work. Jesus, you finally caught me, it's not going to work. What the hell's the point of doing that if you're really hurt and disappointed? What the hell, what do you mean don't let them know it? I guess I finally went too far, all right. Are they gone? Don't let them see you get mad or disappointed. It is molecular poison. It'll hold you right where you are. It depletes you of energy. It makes you continue to see all this as a closed system, that everything works at something else's expense. That I should have been non-disappointed through the actions of these people, and they let me down. I should be non-mad right now had these other people, these other humans, not done so and so. It's a belief that we're all passing the money around, we're all exchanging toys, and somebody promised me a teddy bear if I'd let them use my bicycle, and I didn't get a teddy bear. I got a handful of teddy bear poop. And somebody's going to pay. Either that or I'm going to cry. It is serious bad news. Hug someone when you want to, and don't give it a second or first thought. Worry not about anything you've already done or anything you might do. Other than that, have at it. Any worries that slip through the cracks there, you're okay. Really, you are. Get out and stay out of debt. How much time we got? I'm going to cut the public tape here. We got a tap. I want you to pick out a 12-hour period, or whatever time you're up, your normal day. Pick out a day, decide now that you're going to start, you're going to do it Saturday or Monday or whenever. And for that day that you're up and walking about, I want you to try and to count and to figure out the amount of time you spend thinking about possessions in all senses of it. And thinking about the stuff you got, the stuff that needs to be fixed, the stuff that you're going to try to get a new retrofit of some part, or the stuff you got, whether you can actually trade it in over there at Kmart and they'll give you something a little higher up. The stuff, could I sell it and buy what I really wanted? Or think about the stuff that you got, some particular thing you got, why in the hell did I ever let them talk me into that? And all manners of what you are thinking about stuff. See if you can try and plot, come up with as good a figure as you can of how much time during a day you spend thinking about possessions. Stuff you got, stuff you missed out on, stuff you want to get. And any of you that can really get into this, try and look at, as you're going along trying to keep track of this time, come up with some kind of idea of how much time you spend during an ordinary day, is then see if you can come up with just a feel, or you're going along with trying to do the figuring of the time, a feel of, do you normally think about possessions on the basis of their usefulness, how you're going to use them, or just the beauty of it, in the full sense of how it will help me, how I'll be more beautiful, how I'll be more attractive. Remember, I'm giving it a good old binary division when I say beauty. Everything that would not fit into a utilitarian purpose. You think about possessions on the basis, the ones you're thinking about, whenever you can get a feel doing this plotting and this observation. Do you seem to normally think about possessions on the basis of their beauty or their usefulness? And that's that for tonight.